Okay, I want to respect everybody's time, and I want to give as much time as possible to our Q&A sections that we have planned for today. So with that, I'm going to kick this meeting off. Hello, I am Scott Sanders, City Manager, for any of you that don't know me already. And we've got quite a bit of staff here with us, including our fabulous library staff. I want to send a thank you to our library staff here, Director Woody, Emmanuel. Is Emmanuel here as well? He's really helped us, I know, on these events as well. So thank you to our library. I'm going to do some other introductions in a few minutes because I know we've got a few other individuals that are on their way. So I'm going to hold off on that if that's okay. Again, being respectful of everybody's time. So good morning. Welcome to our annual budget, engagement, and education. And I want to be clear about this right from the start. This is an opportunity for us to explain how the budget works and some of the numbers behind this year's budget that we're in. And we are continuing to work on next year's budget. That will come later. Okay, I want to make that very clear right from the start. This is an opportunity to show you where the city is spending our funds, the tax funds from our residents, and give you opportunity to see that transparency and then ask questions and even input from you on where you would like to see maybe some changes made to our budget, right? So there's going to be all kinds of changes that I would expect to hear, and we continue to, whether that be maybe with some new services, maybe adding resources to existing services for expansion, and maybe it's even partnering with some nonprofits, which we do pretty successfully. And you'll hear throughout this budget that we don't get things done at the city without help from our residents, whether that be neighborhood associations, which I see a lot of great representatives here. Thank you to our neighborhood associations. And again, nonprofits. Because what you'll find out if you don't already know is that the city has a lot of assets out there that are actually maintained by our nonprofit partners. Think about the zoo, our great zoo, the botanical garden. Those are city properties, but they're actually managed through contracts with nonprofits. So in order to get our budget implemented each year, it takes a lot of partnering to get that accomplished. So you'll hear discussions on those points. So there's very few conversations that we have with our public, with engagement, that rise to the level and importance of the budget. And it's so critical that we have these engagements with you, our residents and business owners, to understand, are we hitting the mark with our budgets and the resources that we have available to us? And what input do we need to hear to make improvements? Because we are a culture of continuous improvement, and so we take very seriously the opportunity to hear where those improvements could be made. We're trying to do more in seeking out opportunities for input and being able to respond to your questions. So you're going to hear about this is the first of many opportunities. We do have a online virtual meeting scheduled for next week. That will occur, I want to make sure I get this right, next Tuesday at 5:30 to 7. So I would invite you to come back if you want. If there's not an opportunity in our limited time today, there'll be other opportunities, and we are open both with online opportunities. You can contact the city manager's office if you have input dealing with the budget, or even the finance department. And elected officials, I'm sure, like to hear about those options as well. So over the next 90 minutes, we're going to have a discussion with our finance director, Nick Shaw, and myself, and we're going to be sure to leave some time with Q&A on the budget. And then we will have a second segment of the discussion today, and again next week online, that allows for input specifically with the federal funds that the city has received. Those are what are called the ARPA funds that have been made available to local governments across the entire country. And so that's an opportunity that with about $95 million that we're going to have an opportunity to allocate to services for the city of Des Moines as well. We have more time with that exercise. In fact, we've asked for some more authorization, freedom to spend those funds a little more freely, expecting that our residents are going to want that. And so we have really about another year to figure out some of how to best spend those funds. So we'll have that conversation yet today as well. I want to make sure I've hit on everything. Oh, there will be a discussion on the local option sales tax as well. That is a commitment that we have made in that our residents voted on the sales tax and have a very specific guidance that was given to us on how to spend that. So we'll be able to speak to that today as well. I think with that, I'm going to go ahead and jump into our presentations. And we first have, if I've got this right, a video from a man.
Welcome and thank you for joining the city's Budget, Education, and Engagement presentation. As we look forward to the next year, I'd like to take a moment to reflect on the challenges and successes that we've seen this year at the City of Des Moines. After nearly 2 years, the public health crisis continues to challenge our community in the form of new, concerning COVID variants. Since March 2020, roughly 590,000 positive cases have been reported in Iowa, and we're approaching 100,000 cases in Polk County. This has resulted in roughly 7,600 deaths statewide, with more than 800 reported in Polk County. We will continue the fight against COVID to make sure our residents are healthy and safe, and that we get assistance to those in need. As we work through the pandemic, we want to make sure we recover stronger and better than before. This demands that we make generational investments toward public infrastructure, addressing climate change, and make significant community-led investments toward equity initiatives so that Des Moines can truly be a city for everyone. This year, we made significant community-led investments to address long-standing racial inequities.
People that live in different parts of our community have different needs.
We created the position of Chief Equity Officer for the city and finalized an equity toolkit to be used to evaluate proposed and existing programs and policies in the city. This year, our newly formed Food Security Task Force addressed food insecurity through urban farming and the promotion of local food production. Recommendations including allowing the on-site sale of produce for urban farms and simplifying the use of structures that can expand the growing season like coops and greenhouses. Just recently, the City Council made nearly $500,000 commitment to reducing gun violence in Des Moines by approving the Cure Violence Initiative, a public health approach to preventing violent crime that will be implemented by the long-standing community nonprofit group Creative Visions.
Our target population is 14 to 25, and the Cure Violence model has an opportunity to address that particular targeted age.
Cure Violence implements a public health approach to violence prevention rather than a law enforcement-based approach.
Things are changing, and I hear a lot in different meetings that the community wants to see something other than a uniform responding to these mental health calls.
New approaches to confronting the mental health crisis have also been developed. Our police, in conjunction with Broadlawns Medical Center, have partnered to create Crisis Advocacy Response Effort Program.
I think this is going to be a game changer for the city of Des Moines. A city our size, there's not a lot of programs this ambitious.
This is an extension of the Mobile Crisis Mental Health Response Team and will redirect non-criminal or mental health 911 calls to Broadlawn staff with crisis intervention experience. We are also developing new approaches to address climate change in our community. As president of the global organization ICLEI, I had the opportunity in November to attend COP26, United Nations highest level meeting on climate, convening national leaders from across the world to combat climate change. We drove home the need for collaboration across all levels of government, city, county, state, and federal, and to share and implement our best practices. Des Moines continues to lead the way in tackling climate change through our fund support for environmental programs and investments that promote a clean, safe, and healthy community that is affordable for everyone. As city leaders, one of our goals is to responsibly utilize taxpayer dollars through efficiencies, in our city operations. We are happy to share, despite the financial toll of the COVID pandemic, the local option sales and service tax has exceeded revenue expectations for 2021 with $34 million generated. We continue to use these funds toward objectives that our community identified as a priority: lower property taxes, enhanced public safety, improved neighborhoods, and upgraded streets and stormwater systems.
The underground detention chambers we're installing underneath these parking lots will store a total of 110,000 cubic feet of stormwater.
We recognize that much greater investment in street improvements would result in a considerable difference across Des Moines. Our vision for tomorrow includes a complete transportation system providing safe, efficient infrastructure for walking, bicycling, mass transit, and automobiles. As we look ahead to next year, we will build on our commitment to strengthen this community through a number of initiatives: neighborhood improvements with Invest DSM, a collaborative public-private effort to rejuvenate Merle Hay Mall, the start of a new era on the former Dyco Superfund site south of downtown, and initial plans for a new $12 million community center to replace the Grub YMCA. That is why I am confident that with your help, together we can make 2022 a very special and productive year for Des Moines.
Mayor, would you mind coming up and a few words and then introduce our rest of our elected officials? Thank you.
Wow. Well, it's good to see some people getting back together to talk about the city and our budget. This is the right place to be doing that, and I want to thank all of you for showing up, and all of our staff as well that is here and is available to answer questions, as we all are going to be. And I see that we've got I saw Joe back there. I see Josh sitting right here. Connie's sitting over here. I think that Carl's here. I see Carl here too. And Indira, I see is over here, our newest council member. So Indira, glad you're here today. But I want to thank again this collaboration. I remember when I first took office a number of years ago, we had sort of a different style of doing budgets, where we would, sort of meet in city council chambers and talk about it, and a few people would show up, and we'd just go ahead and move it. We thought it'd be a much greater opportunity for our citizens to participate if we came out, in this case to the library and sometimes to other places, to reach out and get input and exchange ideas on what we're doing and how we're doing, and get your thoughts and your input on that. Over the years, we've certainly seen a lot of those budgets, and we've seen Des Moines really move forward. And Des Moines, I've got to tell you, is one of the most fiscally responsible cities in this country, as indicated, Mr. Manager, by our credit ratings that we have received. And I've got to tell you, it's very helpful when the city has to issue bonds and those sorts of things, and get out there that we have one of the lowest interest rates that any city in this country pays as a result of this great financial work. City of Des Moines, again, is in great shape, but it's awful lot of the responsibility and input is from you as citizens. We want to hear what your concerns are. We want to hear how we're doing. We want to get input and feed that back to our staff as we begin to put together the plan for the upcoming 22-23 year. So again, Scott, thanks for letting me get up here and rant on here for a few minutes. And as I watched that video, I was thinking, who the heck is that guy that's up there with that tie? I hardly recognized myself having spent most of the time with my mask on the last couple of years. And here I saw myself without one to make that presentation. But again, thanks for coming. Scott, back to you.
Nick, if you want to go ahead and come on up. So let's jump right into the presentation of the background of the current year's budget and how funds are being spent, and get into a little bit of the process so that we can quickly move on to Q&A and hear from the public. So I am going to start the presentation. And actually, I get the first slide or two. And so obviously, what we have with an annual budget at the city is a starting point for which the city manager's office works with each of the departments in looking at the existing year's budget and make determinations as to how to make improvements, have requests from the department, starting out with the staff level input. And that helps me get a starting point that then we can come out to the public and get the public's input, like arrangements for today, and continue to improve on that budget such that there would be a final city manager's recommended budget presented to the council in January or February for their discussions, further workshops in the public, and get to a final answer in March. Nick will give more detail on the actual dates that will apply in this process for this season. Nick will have an opportunity to speak with you about the background of a little bit about how government budgeting works, just so you're familiar. There are restrictions on a lot of the revenues that come into the city, and that is handled through what's called fund structures, in that the monies come in through a specific fund and have purpose that have to be spent, those funds have to be spent on. There is reporting and transparency that occurs throughout, including on our website, and so those will be referenced along with the conversations today. And again, I mentioned local option sales tax will be discussed. So again, this information will also be available online. We're not going to go through every aspect of it, but we wanted you to be aware of the process and some of the numbers that are behind our budgets. Again, we have staff here available to help answer any questions when the Q&A comes up, and I'm really appreciative of the budget efforts that our departments put into this, because they need to review from a service level and an outcome base how their services are being provided and how well. And that takes a lot of work at the department level to get that accomplished. There is a process for requesting changes to the budget through the departments. That is a budget review committee. Know that that is in the background as well. That is a best practice at larger cities across the country. And essentially our human resources and our finance department are involved in those conversations, such that every vacancy that occurs at the city is reviewed to look at if there's a better way to fill that position and possibly a different job description. Maybe there's a private option that may even be available through contracting. So those are scrutinized in the background. I want the public to know that we follow those best practices with this review team that exists at the city. So with that, I'm going to let Nick go on with more of the details, and I'll be right back with the Q&A after that.
Thank you, Scott. And like you said, these slides will be available to the public on our website. So as I go through these, if I'm going a little fast, feel free to ask during the Q&A section, or they will be available online as well. Just to kind of give you an idea of our process and how we forecast a budget every year, as soon as we start a new fiscal year, so when we started our fiscal year 22 back in July, we already started our work on our fiscal year 23 budget. As our departments know, they already are starting to have those processes of thinking through that. Through that, the department's already having to think through that approach for those requests in the next fiscal year. We are already working towards those revenue estimates and the expenditures, a lot on the salary side because that's the biggest component of our expenses. And we basically have these budget topic work sessions that we have that we have with the council to kind of go over a lot of the information with them and for the public to see on those work sessions. And what that does, we do that in about January, February. And then the council holds a series of hearings for the budget and the capital improvement plan as well. Those are usually set hearings and hold hearings in that February, March timeframe. And then we are statutory required to do our submission of that in March to the county and to the state. So specifically, when we get into this year's schedule for the fiscal year 23 budget, we've already had some items that have come up with the council workshop that we had back near the end of October, where we kind of talked about the overall timeline for this budget and input for what we were going to do for the outreach. And originally at that, we decided to add, based off council input, to add this in-person meeting as well as having that webinar next week. And then our anticipation is to have the draft recommended budget of Scott's near the end of January before the council workshop at the beginning of February. Now, the actual council meeting activities that are going to happen for this year's budget are going to happen over the course of starting in January with the approval of the max property tax dollars, and then holding that hearing at the beginning of February, and then setting the approval of the notice of the actual budget hearing for March 7th. And then again, we have to get that to the county by the end of March. As Scott alluded to, we are required to account for our finances through a fund structure, kind of tracking those expenses and revenues on those related accounts as it correlates. It's very similar on the state and local and county level to follow those requirements. To kind of give you an idea of some of the funds that we have and what we cover, the general fund is the primary operating fund of the city. That's where our regular fund levy goes in, that 810 levy that we have, a part of our levy that goes into that for our main services. That's usually what we focus on for our majority of our overall budgets of the administrative work and some of the parks and IT and all those are within that general fund. And we'll kind of get into what makes up that general fund budget, because that's the meat and potatoes of our operation is what goes through that general fund. Another big component of the city operations is our capital projects. Those are basically how we account for the acquisition of assets and construction of those infrastructure projects within that capital projects. With that, those are primarily funded through debt issuances and federal funds and grants and other things that fund those projects over time. And that's leads me into the enterprise funds. Those funds are considered business type funds. Those are those funds that are set up in a way that the fees that are paid by users is to pay for the services that are being provided. Those are supposed to be run like a business. So we'll kind of get into some of those funds later in the slides. Another specific type of fund that we have at the city is what's called special revenue funds. Those funds are a unique revenue source that can only legally be spent on certain items. So a good example of that is like our road use tax fund or our local option sales and service tax funds that come in that way. Now, internal service funds are much like the enterprise funds that we have that are supposed to be running like a business, but those are businesses that are serving the city itself. So those would be like our fleet operations that service our vehicles for all of the departments. And so those are housed in that particular fund, and it's actually a service done through the city to be like a business for the rest of the city. And then our debt service correlates with the capital projects in relation to, that's where we actually pay the principal and interest on our bonds that we issue for our tax-supported debt, which would be our parks and streets improvements that we do. So as we look at the 2022 budget that we are currently in and almost halfway through, this slide kind of does a representation of where we get our revenues within the general fund. In this, you can see the largest percentage there is property taxes, followed up by fees and charges for service, and then it goes into the franchise fee for a specific revenue site. So from that, you basically can see that property taxes is that main generator for that fund. So to kind of give you an idea of property taxes, because we're just one piece of the property taxes that our residents pay, this is kind of a breakout of every dollar that you pay in property taxes, how that splits up to the different taxing entities. As you can see here highlighted in blue, that's the city portion of it. So for every dollar that you'll pay for the fiscal year 22 is actually 37.5% to the city of Des Moines. And then you can kind of see the breakout there for Broadlawns, Public School, the Des Moines Public School, DART, Polk County, and DMAC are the other entities that make up that dollar. If you break down that specific 37.5%, it breaks out between the regular general fund levy, the liability, property, and self-insurance, and the employee benefits levy, and the debt service levy as well. So that's kind of how that breaks out as that 37.5%, how it gets allocated out to those specific funds that we have. To kind of give you an example of a house within a common area within Des Moines, if you had an assessed value of $100,000, the taxable value has what's called a rollback that is applied of how much is actually taxed. And so within the fiscal year 22, that percentage is about 56.4% of your assessed value is what is actually you're paying tax on. So what that annual bill on that $100,000 home would be about just under $2,500. Of that, the city would be $937, and to put that in perspective, that's the city collecting about $78 a month on that $100,000 house. To get into a little bit more on the expense side from the general fund, as you can see, if you break it out on the types of costs that we have within the general fund, the largest percent there is obviously the personnel services, the cost for our staff. That's at 79%, and then the next one is our contracted services that we are able to do for work for the different departments. Also, within the contracted services is kind of the payout of the hotel motel tax to our nonprofit communities of Bravo and the CVB. Of each one of those get 2% of the 7% that the city collects in the hotel motel. If you actually break down those expenses by department, you can see here that the largest percentage is that public safety. That's 62% when you add the police and fire together. And then if you look at kind of the administrative services, we've kind of lumped the city clerk, the city manager, finance, human resources, IT, legal, mayor, and council all into that one administrative services, making up that 18%. From those different departments that we have, some of and you can kind of see this on the handout, we kind of refer to that as the buckets, the colorful sheet there, kind of talks about some of the services that the general fund provides. You can see that in that kind of the blue section of that sheet. They're also here on the slides as well, kind of highlighting what those services are being provided by from that general fund. And those colors are coded to the different fund types that are on that sheet. Some of the other funds that we have, like I talked about before in that fund structure, we've got the enterprise funds. So some examples of that is is the funds that primarily are with the public works, with the sanitary sewer, stormwater, solid waste. Those funds are those business type funds that I referred to earlier. We also have our parking that's run by our engineering department as well. And again, going into the special revenue funds, those were those specific revenues that are coming in that legally can only be spent for a specific purpose. Again, those were like the local option sales tax, the road use tax, community development block grants, and our urban renewal TIF programs as well. Our internal service funds, we have two major ones that we have. Those are the equipment maintenance that I referenced earlier, and then also our forestry services within the Public Works Department is also an internal service fund. And you can kind of follow along on that handout as well to kind of reference which ones of these services kind of fall into those different groups. So the miles of sewer obviously is a part of that business type funds, those enterprise funds. Now shifting over to the capital projects, I just wanted to summarize for this audience kind of the last capital improvement plan that we passed, which kind of shows some major investments that we have going on within the different capital projects that we're going forward. As you kind of see this breakout here, when you're looking at the tax supported versus the enterprise funds, you can see that there's definitely a large number in these current upfront years of this 5-year plan that we're working on. And to kind of put it in perspective, if you actually look at this historical trend, you can see that we're at a peak, that we're trying to do a large amount of investments in our all of our capital projects, not only the tax supported, but also in our enterprise funds, like our stormwater and sanitary sewers. If you break out the tax supported ones, which is a part of what gets paid by primarily geo debt that's issued, you can see that breakout is over 50% street improvements that we are working on, and then followed up with some work on municipal buildings, which would be kind of that we have around, that would also include existing buildings as well as the new Fire Station 11 that was on the northeast side of the city. If you go into the tax-supported sources of funds, like I said, the primary source of funds is those general obligated bonds, those bonds that get paid back through the debt service fund. And then you've got a laundry list of other funds that go into them to cover those expenses to pay for those projects. And again, these documents are out on our website for our CIP document that's referenced in that slide as well. So from that standpoint, I'm going to transition into the kind of talking about our local option, a specific special revenue fund that we have started to be collected in fiscal year 2020. And so this is the expense report from fiscal year 21. So as it breaks out for the use of funds that we had for fiscal year 21, you can see that we had 51% going to property tax relief. A primary function of that is going into our debt service fund to reflect that reduced tax rate that we did in fiscal year 2020. We reduced the rate by 60 cents on our property tax rate, and that local option sales tax is funding what that 60 cents and what the additional capital projects that we are investing in would require to pay that debt back. As you can see, we also have street improvements and flood prevention as the next area, and then we have neighborhood improvements and public safety expenditures, and then the remaining amount went into kind of our reserve balance that we can then kind of spend in subsequent years, as well as being fiscally responsible, having a reserve there to cushion ups and downs that we will have with local option sales tax, since it is a very variable type of revenue. To kind of give reference to that property tax levy, property tax support relief that we were putting in, this slide represents where we would be with our tax rate given the record investments that we've had for our municipal bonds over the course of the current capital improvement plan. As you can see for fiscal year 22, that's a difference of $1.84 of where our rate would have to have been to pay for the amount of projects that we were doing in the capital projects thus far. Going into this a little bit more detail, I'm going to try and be cognizant of everybody's time and give more time to Q&A. I'm going to kind of go through these pretty quick as to what kind of expenses were there for each one of the subject areas. So for the project tax relief that we did, it was between that property tax going into the debt service fund to pay for the debt that we issued, as well as a contribution to Neighborhood Development Corp as well. When you go into the street improvement and flood prevention, we had invested $5 million into street improvements. The stormwater improvements, we had $550,000 going towards a citywide plan, as well as $1 million going back for a loan that we did from the general fund to the capital projects. And then we also have put in money for flood prevention buyouts as well. The neighborhood improvements that we invested in, we did about $2.8 million that went into the special investment districts to invest DSM. We also had started with expenses in the property improvement program, and we also went through on some neighborhood matching grants that we kind of used the template of the Invest DSM to be able to do those neighborhood matching grants as well as the expanded library hours to reopen the closed days that we had for the neighborhood improvements as well. As we go into the public safety improvements and expenditures, the firefighter positions were those positions that were funded through a SAFER grant in the past. There were 13 positions that were being funded there, and we basically had to continue those positions through funding of local option sales tax versus not having that grant funding anymore. And then we also have allocated $200,000 within the mobile crisis services grant, which was based off of an agreement that we have with Broadlawns. And as I said, the reserve, these are actually not what we spent in 21, but the actual balances at the end of fiscal year 21. And the designated are those specific ones that we talked about in those different categories that carry a balance that is designated for a particular purpose. And then the financial reserve is those to try and allow us to allocate to some of those projects later, or to sustain if local option doesn't come in where we anticipated in any one year. And like I said, I know that was pretty quick, but I just want to open it up. We're going to open up for input and questions, and I'll let Scott take back over.
Hey, thank you, Nick. Don't go too far, right, with some of these questions. So we have microphones set up on both sides of the room. We'll start the first session of Q&A specific to the budget. So I would ask if you would like to make any comments at this time to please approach the microphones on either side, and we'll just go back and forth. I would ask that any comments that you're mindful of everyone's time. We are, again, available after the presentation. Next week, we're available at City Hall. So I'd say go right at it.
Hello, can everyone hear me?
Tap on it, you're probably close.
Can everyone hear me?
There you go.
Hello. Hello, I'm Jenny Kleiss, Vice Chair of the Stormwater Infrastructure Committee. Our chairperson, Gloria Hoffman, could not make it to today's meeting, but sends her best. Is there anyone else here from the committee? If so, could you please stand up and state your name? Thanks for being here. As you know, this is a state-required citizens committee jointly appointed by the City Council and the Public Works Director. We have been working on infrastructure issues for the city since this group was formed in 2019. Our committee believes the city is making great strides, and we are very appreciative. Des Moines infrastructure, pipes in the ground here, is extremely old and vulnerable. A study of the 71 watersheds in Des Moines is currently in progress, and at least 20 have been identified in serious need of repair. Several projects are currently underway: Hamilton Drainage Area, Easter Lake, Closes Creek, and Crawford Creek. Changing climate is causing more storms more frequently that are more intense, thus causing substantial flooding issues across the country, which have a very serious impact in 3 areas: environmental, safety, and economic. For example, there were many businesses in Des Moines that didn't reopen after the flood in 2018. The projects being identified are going to take many, many years to complete and will require extensive funding. Currently, the only identified sources of money to address this are the stormwater utility tax and a minimal allocation from the local option sales tax. We'd like to see an increase in stormwater projects funded by LOST. The city has 2 potential sources of funding not currently included in the budgets. The first is the COVID relief funding. The second is the infrastructure bill funding. Since there is very limited stormwater funding included in the infrastructure bill, would there be any consideration to increase potential funding from the COVID relief funds for stormwater over some of the priorities that have been funded in the infrastructure bill? On behalf of the committee, I respectfully request a substantial portion of these funds to be allocated to remedy the urgent needs of the aging stormwater pipes and improving flood risk in the city of Des Moines. It's my understanding that you have a list of the shovel-ready projects. Additionally, the Stormwater Infrastructure Citizens Committee offers their assistance to the city in advocating for this funding request. Please let us know if we can be of assistance. Thank you.
Okay. I'm guessing we have other comments there. Yep, go ahead and approach.
There are 2 suggestions I would like to make. One is I would like to see in the document that I have in my left hand, which is the local option, I would love to see an increase in the neighborhood matching grants from the existing, this year's expenditure, probably into the range of $500,000. The program started off, as I understand it, at $100,000 and has been amazingly successful in encouraging neighborhood groups and teams of people in neighborhoods to take advantage of that particular program. The other thing I would like to suggest, and it would be a new line, neighborhood association grants, probably in the range of $200,000, and that would be discrete grants to the 52 chartered neighborhood associations in the city of Des Moines, so they could do things beyond what has already taken place with some of the improvements in the neighborhoods and the organization of the executive department as it relates to its relationships with neighborhood associations. With that, I will thank you all.
Okay.
Hello, my name is Indira Shoemaker. I am recently elected city council person for Ward 1, but before I was elected, I was organizing in this community since June of 2020 around city council meetings and around some of the demands that we've had in this community with a lot of other organizers and organizations who have been concerned about what we've seen in the city. So to prepare for this meeting, we met with about a dozen community organizers who have been advocating over this time period since the protests in 2020 and even before for lots of different initiatives. So we have a list of demands and we have handouts for city staff so you guys can follow up on those. But those include defunding DMPD, looking at demilitarization, looking at hiring freezes, looking at no salary increases, reducing starting salaries, not giving bonuses, promotions, special appointments, off-duty opportunities or overtime opportunities for cops who are currently under investigation or disciplinary actions, and transferring more responsibilities to civilian forces to reduce that enormous personnel budget we have for police, looking at traffic enforcement, looking at expanding that 24/7 crisis, mobile health crisis team, and looking at more programs like violence interrupters and mediators. We are looking at capping the budget. We don't want to see any budget increases from the fiscal year 21. Any increase in the budget must be matched by an equivalent decrease. But we also want to look at cuts to the budget, and some of the other people that I'm here with will be talking about that as well. But that looks like eliminating some departments that are just there for criminalization and don't make us safe. Ending patrolling, just driving around communities, having cops just sitting around in their cars and not actually keeping us safer, and reducing our fleet. And then not having as much marketing money going into the police. We're looking at reallocation of police funds into solving some of the problems that police show up to criminalize. And that leads into reimagining public safety. We want to look at non-carceral emergency response, civilian crisis emergency response teams, transformative restorative justice programs, and emergency survival resources and relocation services so we can focus on victims of harm and not the perpetrators. We want to look at prevention, and we want to look at decriminalization of victimless crimes. Slow down a bit, yeah, I'm sorry. You're being interpreted, sorry. Absolutely. We want to look at programs that are going to lessen police interaction, especially with marginalized communities. Beyond defunding police and reimagining public safety, we want to invest in housing first initiatives, end houseless camp evictions, and invest in survival resources for our houseless, unhoused, and underhoused individuals. We want to invest in food security and eliminate food deserts. We want a commitment from the city to commit to a grocery store within 10 minutes. That's accessibility for all mobility levels, making sure there are staple foods and produce. And we want to dedicate a % of TIF development funds to developments that have grocery stores. We want to invest in better sustainability and climate resiliency. We need to ramp that up. And then we are going to talk as well about accountability in the public budgeting process, making sure that these demands are followed up on. And with that, I will let some of my other colleagues speak.
And did I understand that you will provide that document as well?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Hey, how's it going? My name's Luke Bascomb, and it's awesome to see everyone out here for this public budget meeting. Yeah, a lot of those things that Indira touched on are important for me, things to see the city invest in. I wanted to talk just specifically about the defund the police side of it. You know, you started off, Scott, today talking a little bit about how, you know, these are our taxpayer dollars that are being used by the city in various different ways. And myself as a taxpayer, I want to see less money going to the police here in Des Moines. So, you know, also we touched upon this earlier, but about 40% of our city funds go to the police, and I feel that we need to be investing more in the root causes of houselessness, drug use, crime, unemployment, rather than putting all of our money into a reactionary response or into the enforcement of these things that we'd like to not see within our communities. We need to invest in the root causes of those things. So I don't think we should be putting $78 million into having police patrol our streets when we're not investing the same amount into, you know, the reason crime exists in the first place. And one of the easiest places to start, in my opinion, is we need to demilitarize our police. We've got, you know, a police that have tanks, which just makes no sense at all. When would that be practically used within our city? We have a police that has used in the last couple years tear gas and rubber bullets against protesters. You know, like the UN came out and spoke about human rights violations happening in the US during the protests that followed the murder of George Floyd. That includes Des Moines. Those human rights violations were happening here too. So we need to stop investing in that kind of violent response to protest, which is something that Americans tend to really tout as, you know, like one of the most valuable pieces of our democracy. And then another thing that I think is very often misunderstood with defund and this conversation is this isn't just about getting rid of the police. We want a one-for-one reallocation of money into programs that are actually going to make our communities safer. So there are a couple places that come to mind for me. One of those is the Vice and Narcotics Department within the police. I know they received a couple $1 million last year in the budget. It's been pretty publicly known that there have been huge drug raids in the last year where, you know, you've got police and SWAT teams showing up at people's homes in the middle of the night. But that's just responding to drug use and to you know, folks selling drugs. That's not getting at the reason that people are using drugs in the first place. That's not getting at the reason that people are selling drugs in the first place. You know, that happens because of mental health struggles, like people resort to using drugs because of mental health struggles. People resort to selling drugs because there aren't enough opportunities for them to be employed in a way that can, you know, make enough money so they can pay their bills. So I would like to see, you know, similar to Cure Violence, why don't we invest in our nonprofits, you know, ask them to partner with the city for, you know, setting up more opportunities to help with like drug rehabilitation and recovery, even setting up like a safe injection site within the city for folks that are struggling with, you know, like heroin addiction, that sort of thing. That to me is a more valuable way to spend our city money than continuing to, you know, crack down on folks and not really getting at the root of the problem. I'll let some other folks speak here. I don't want to take up too much time, but similar to kind of what Indira was saying, I would like to see more transparency and accountability in how the public comments get you know, used within the city budget. And even it would be great if there could be another opportunity for folks to speak on what they would like to see in the city budget. I know this is during a lot of people's lunch hour, but some folks don't have the time to come out, you know, on a weekday in the middle of the day. So having like a town hall event or something would be really cool. But yeah, thank you.
Hi, my name is John Noble. I'm here to talk about what everyone else is here to talk about as well. I do want to note with what Luke was talking about with transparency and accountability, thinking about this time, this is not a super convenient time for working folks. I had to leave my job this afternoon, work that out to come here. My wife is one of the downtown business professionals who this was supposedly sort of like marketed towards, that it'd be easy for them to get here. It does not work for her lunch hour, and she literally works like a couple blocks away, right? Like there are folks who would like opportunities to participate in something like this. We need more opportunities for something like this. My day job is in nonviolent conflict resolution, peace conflict resolution, and I want to talk today about violent solutions versus nonviolent solutions, right? And I think that when we're talking about reallocating funding towards solutions, we need something like nonviolent community solutions. And that's the things we were talking about today. It doesn't involve sending police into situations. It doesn't involve sending guns or tanks into situations. It means de-escalators, it means mediators, it means Narcan distribution, it means resources for domestic violence victims that doesn't involve interacting with police. It involves responses that are victim-centered, humane, trauma-informed. And those are all things that we can and should do without police interaction. When my wife and I moved back to Des Moines after several years, one of the first things I saw was DMPD rolling a tank and a sound weapon into a residential neighborhood. That's a disgrace. That's not a community response. That's not the kind of response that we need here. We need human-centered responses, we need compassionate responses, and we need community-centered responses. And that's what I want to see going forward. This is a community where I want to have and raise children, and I want those children, and all children, especially black and brown children, undocumented children, children who face dangerous violence at the hands of police every day. I want those children to live in a community where they have community responses that are centered on their needs, not on violence. So.
Hello, my name is Giovanni Bahena. I am going to talk about something that's a bit passionate to me, included in this, and that is creating a community and a city in which its citizens and members can thrive, not just survive. And an essential part of thriving is making sure that housing is completely accessible to all. Housing is not accessible to every person in this city, and there are a lot of buildings that we could take and use, and hopefully I would love to see more low-income housing, if not free housing, for community members that may be in need of that, as well as sustainability in the availability of food. Food is not as readily available in a lot of parts of Des Moines, and that just doesn't make any sense to me, truthfully, actively. I also am fully agreeing that we need to spend more money on making sure that we are prepared for any and all climate crises that are going to be coming up, i.e. today we are having hurricane winds in about 3 hours, and how exactly are we prepared? Having learned from a derecho last summer, question mark on the learned, but I believe that the city budget should be going to preparing and being proactive instead of reactive to these situations, and by putting money aside and making sure things are sustainable and creating a situation in which our community members can thrive, not just survive, is a way that we can be proactive instead of reactive. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Adam Callanan. I'm going to talk a lot about the accountability piece that we'd like to see for this, which it's always kind of hard and challenging with accountability to envision what that would look like and how we could actually get accountability from our city government. One big thing that I'm thinking about is that we know we have these public hearings in like January, February, March, but after those public hearings, there isn't really time designated for city staff to actually make edits based on the feedback they get in those hearings. So I'd love to see something like that actually built into the timeline. But beyond that, I would like to see a public comment document published, and also a document based on the actual budgeting decisions. You know, if a certain department's budget is changed by this % from last year, why was that decision made? I'd like to see some transparency around why each of those decisions is being made, because we know that there are reasons and a lot of work goes into this budget. So just having that in a document the public can read and access would be amazing. We'd also like to see adoption of at least 75% of the public's budget demands to get from these meetings and emails and everything. And again, we'd like to see that tied directly to somewhere in a document so that we can see the justification for these changes and see that the public is affecting the process. We'd also, like I said, explain any budget changes that way in a document or through a meeting like this. We'd also like participatory budgeting, that's a tricky word. We'd like to improve outreach and accessibility. As people said before me, this is not a very accessible meeting with the time that it's picked. I do appreciate the bigger meeting than City Hall, and I'd like to see more meetings like this where there is an easier way to access the building. But also the fact that there's a storm coming in a few hours, and it's weird that we're here at this meeting instead of dealing with that in a lot of ways. We'd like to commit to more meetings, not just something after public hearings. We need more meetings like this. I know that one was requested by council to be had earlier in November, and that didn't happen, so I'm not sure why that didn't happen, but we know that not just us, but other council members also want this process to be improved. I'm glad this is better than last year, but there's still more that the city can and should be doing. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Kavya Parsa. I live at 50321 in Ward 3. I want to start by strongly supporting each and every line item in the People's Budget Coalition demands that have been provided by you today. I want to specifically talk about accessibility both in the budgeting process and in City Council's overall processes. Translation services should be provided regularly at all City Council meetings at the city's expense, not by community nonprofits. Agendas should be put out more regularly and in advance. There should be a well-delineated process on the city's website explaining how to provide a comment, how to attend a meeting, and how to participate in the political process. And then the acceptance of these public comments and of the public participation should be documented. The statements that are being made should be put out in our City Council minutes, who is making them, what comments are being made, so that we can specifically compare the feedback that the City Council is getting on each and every proposal that they get to the decisions that are made by the City Council and the public input that they received. And I'd like to point out that in this way, the city could continue to support the various initiatives that they built in 2021 in a way that uplifts community voices. For example, the city has commendably started an initiative to assist with housing by creating a new housing shelter, while at the same time continuing programs that bulldoze homeless camps and don't adequately provide new shelter and resources. And so by allowing community input, by removing accessibility barriers such as having an address requirement to speak at a city council meeting, the city would have a broader range of input and better methods of incorporating public opinion into their decisions. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Carolyn Hewlin Hake-Walker. I live at 4111 Ingersoll Avenue. I'm a member of the Des Moines Citizens Task Force on Sustainability. And I came here today, especially after hearing the weather report last night that said we were going to have 70+ degree temperatures and 60 to 80 mile an hour winds with possible tornadoes in December. Folks, in December. I also, let me see if I can find it. There was a paragraph in an article just written by a scientist that says, 2021 was the year that the climate crisis became unavoidable. With any luck, in hindsight, this will be seen as the year when Americans finally, belatedly came to understand the severity of the crisis. The evidence has been impossible to ignore. A freakish winter deep freeze that shut down Texas, another horrific fire season in the West, a historic heat wave in the Pacific Northwest that killed over 200 people, a spate of deadly floods in the South, a storm so powerful it ended up in killing dozens of people in the Northeast, 1,000 miles from where it landfall. According to the Pew Research Center, more Americans than ever before say that they are experiencing extreme weather events, and in a separate survey, nearly 8 in 10 people said that such events have made them more concerned about climate change. The alarm bells are clanging. I would like to say, first of all, thank you for allowing the community to give some real input into this budget. But when it comes to looking at the budget, when it comes to looking at all the enterprise projects and the CIP projects, I really think it's important to look at all budget items with a climate lens. And in that sense, I'm asking for such things as building electrical policies, retrofitting buildings that are old, electrical transit everywhere, electrical vehicle infrastructure, large building energy and water efficiency at a much higher level, a much increased tree canopy that's been called for from our forestry department, which has a master plan now, more green infrastructure than ever, and finally, getting off of fossil fuels as fast as we can. Thank you.
I'm Jim Ballard. I'm the president of the Easter Lake Area Neighborhood Association, and I chair the coalition of Southside Neighborhood Associations, which is 12 Southside Neighborhood Associations, basically making up the whole South Side of Des Moines. And while I appreciate all the comments, I've avoided meetings at City Council for the last couple of years on purpose. But I wanted to speak today. I didn't intend to speak to this today, but I want to speak to it so that people hear this voice. The people that are speaking have very good questions, causes, purposes. I've been involved in city activities, neighborhoods for 25 years. I remember when we used to have 4 or 5 of these budget meetings, and the reason there's only one now and one in the evening is because nobody ever showed up. Okay? When I walked in today, I was shocked at how many people are here. I think it's great, but the reason there aren't more and more meetings is because nobody showed up. Most of the meetings were more staff than people from the city to care about what was going on. So I suspect that the city will react to this without people yelling at them, noticing that we might have to have more meetings to accommodate more people if more people are going to become engaged, and that this isn't just a passing thing. Like I said, I also serve on the Des Moines Park and Rec Board, a past member of Friends of Des Moines Parks, very involved with city activities for 25 years that I've lived in the city of Des Moines. So I think it's a bit harsh for people to come on board and be critical of everything without just engaging in the process and trying to make things better. I mean, I think all the things that you want to do are great, but I don't think the way you're approaching them are the way that it should be done. I'm happy to work with you on a lot of these things. I make my contacts not by bullying the city or bullying a city meeting when people are trying to conduct business, but by talking to those people offline, making connections with nonprofits, people who can make those differences. People need to have a personal accountability. I understand. Hey, I know all kinds of people into drugs. I work in a college environment most of my time. Those people don't have mental health problems. They just want to take drugs. I'm sorry. The reason there's people busting into houses to bust drug things is because I don't want them in my neighborhood. I'm glad the police are busting into houses and taking away drugs. There's a neighborhood not too far from where I live that the chief of police went and sat during his lunch hour on that street just to change the activity. That's the commitment of our police to do things like that, and it worked. So I'm not a fan of violence at all, but there is a need to have armed police to do armed police things, and there's a need for violence counselors and nonviolent counselors to address those kind of things. They all need to exist, and I think you're trying to say that in much of what you're saying, but what it comes out to people that I talk to is you don't want police, and I don't think that's what you really want. I think you want the appropriate police reaction. And my frustration goes stronger because this is a budget meeting, and I see a bunch of people, and I'm off topic too now at this point in time, but I had to. I feel my voice hasn't been heard for the last 2 years, and it's time that it comes out again. Thank you.
My name is George Davis with the Southwestern Hills Neighborhood Association, and I just needed some clarity on something, Scott. Hopefully you can provide that. I believe the county is responsible for assessing the property values. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, and then of that, under the current Iowa law, 56% of that assessed value is taxed, and the millage rate right now, I think in Des Moines, is around $16.61. Now, is that millage rate on the total assessed value or just the city's part of the assessed value?
So that's on the lower valuation based on the 56%.
Okay. And then another comment, thank you for that clarity, and another comment I wanted to make is I look at your figures here, and I heard a lot of people responding to the reducing the police force. However, as I look at your figures, you have approximately 300 firefighters, which I don't think anyone has said that they wanted to see that decreased. We have, of those 300, they made 28,000 plus calls, or addressed 28,000 calls. But I see our police department has only 372 employees, and they addressed over 200,000 calls. So that's about an 8-to-1 or 7-to-1 disparity there. So I'm wondering if actually, based on the call figures, if we in fact have enough police at this time. Thank you very much.
Okay. Hi there, my name is Jonna Moresi. I'm a resident of Des Moines. First, I have a question for you, Mr. Sanders. On this sheet right in the center, one of the yellow figures says there are 5,693 public parking ramp spaces. Do you know if that figure includes any of the parking spots in the $45 million parking garage that is unopened to the public at this time?
Does it include Walnut? It does.
It does? Okay, well, since that garage isn't open to the public, I would maybe not want to see that on this document, showing where funds have gone.
Understood.
Beyond that, a few comments. So this week, it was already mentioned, but the city of Des Moines destroyed a houseless camp and the belongings of the individuals that live there. That violent action by the city was paid for by taxpayer dollars, and that money, I think, should have gone toward providing safe living conditions for our houseless neighbors. I would also like to see additional resources be provided to the Civil and Human Rights Commission. 1 year ago, on December 14th, 2020, I filed a complaint of discrimination against my former landlord. It took 1 month for the city to respond to me and open an investigation into the issue. This was due in part to there only being one person doing all of the investigations for the city. In August, this sole investigator left the city department, and my case was handed off to the state of Iowa's Department of Human and Civil Rights, which essentially restarted the process. I have now waited over a year for justice in my issue. I am lucky to have had the resources to move out of this landlord's property, but others haven't been so fortunate. There are other people at this meeting still facing injustice from this same landlord who has continued to operate in the city of Des Moines because this department has not resolved the case. This department needs additional funds and city attention so that other residents who follow the process available to them to report discrimination are not treated the same way I was.
Okay. All right. One more here, and then we need to jump into ARPA discussion. Go right ahead.
Okay. Hi,
Karen.
Carol Maher,
Carol.
Ward 3. To this young lady's question about the, I didn't touch it, so I don't know.
No, you just need to be close. You need to be real
Sorry.
close.
I'm close. Can you hear me now? Okay. Sorry, I don't want to take my mask off.
That's fine.
Based on the current state of COVID. So to follow up on the question about the parking garage, a bigger question I think should be, should the city be in the business of owning parking? I'm not sure, based on the business environment as well as COVID and the environment in general. I'm not sure if that's something that the city should be owning and looking to maintain. Also, will department level budgets be available as this progress progresses?
Yes.
Okay, great. And then finally, I think that every dollar that we contemplate should be through a climate change lens, as one of the other residents spoke to over here. I'm in shorts on December 15th.
Right.
It's really awesome, but it's bad. And the guilt, Catholic guilt as well as climate guilt, is a little overwhelming. Thanks to the leadership of Mayor County and Council Member Mandelbaum on this front, and I hope that more members can get on board. Thank you for their leadership on the environment and climate change initiatives. I think our tax abatement dollars, our TIF dollars, and all the capital funds we spend need to be adhered to and thought more clearly on the climate change impact. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Nick, I think we ought to spend just a couple minutes on the ARPA explanation and where we're at with that status, and then offer up some more time for comments, maybe even specifically with the opportunity with these funds. I'm just going to briefly introduce the topic, and then I think you've got a couple slides that I'd ask that you kind of just go through quickly. Just under $95 million is going to be available to the city. There are some rules you're going to hear about that are very restrictive on how those funds would need to be spent, unless we're able to show that there was lost revenue to the city, like our general fund, so to speak, and in which case then there's more freedoms on how those funds could be spent. And so we have asked for some changes at the federal level to make those funds more flexible, and we have not heard back yet. I'm going to leave it at that and let Nick give the presentation, and then we'll do some quick Q&A at that point.
So again, I'm going to try and go through this fairly quick. These will be available. Sorry about that. Again, I'm going to try and go through these slides pretty quick so we can open back up for specific questions on the ARPA, or American Rescue Plan Act. This again is just to kind of cover the kind of the summary of the guidance that we received, as well as kind of some of what we're trying to look at for investment. So whether if you're aware of it or not, the American Rescue Plan Act has within it the Corona state and local fiscal recovery funds. That's within that subtitle M. We'll kind of go through this a little bit more detail. It was enacted March 10th. The U.S. Treasury came out with their interim final rules back in May, and they gave a 60-day window to give feedback and comments. They were solicited. As Scott alluded to, we did submit a concern with the way that they refer to as the lost revenue calculation, and we'll get into that a little bit more. And these slides that'll be available has hyperlinks in there that you can actually go and look to see. Like I showed you, the interim final rules are out there, as well as the Treasury's frequently asked questions and fact sheets that they have there as well. So within the American Rescue Plan Act, there was $130 billion that was allocated to local. Of that, 94.8 was allocated to the city of Des Moines. For those cities over 50,000, it was based off of a modified calculation of the Community Development Block Grant system. And so from that formula, that's where it derived that 94.8 for the city of Des Moines. The funds must be obligated, so there has to be an obligation by the council of where those funds will be paid by the end of calendar year 2024, and it has to be expended by the end of calendar year 26. So we've got a little bit of time, but we are trying to get that feedback from the U.S. Treasury on our request on that calculation. From the guidance that we received, there was eligible use is highlighted. I'm not going to go for word here, but as you can kind of see, there is the overall categories are listed here as the A, B, C, and D. The A is kind of talking about the the response to COVID-19. B refers to workers performing essential work during COVID-19. C is the portion that we were talking about, that the provision for government services to the extent of the reduction in revenue. And then the last portion of that is investment into water, sewer, and broadband infrastructure. I did include some of the language that we did submit to the Treasury. The main reason why that we had done that was in regards to the revenue losses. The way it was calculated was based off of fiscal year 2019, which ended June 30th, 2019 for us. On the very next day, we started collecting local option sales tax. So in the calculation, that is actually counted against us and basically attributes that new revenue lumped in with the rest of our revenue. So with it being included on that, it skews how much we actually lost because of COVID-19 and being able to address that. So as we go into what we're trying to look at different expenses, we kind of structured it a little bit different than the four categories that the U.S. Treasury did. This is kind of a list of what we've been looking at and discussing, and we aren't taking action on the dollar amount, because the categories and how much we allocate to it is kind of dependent on that response that we get from the Treasury on the loss calculation because of the uniqueness of our situation. As you can see here, we kind of highlight the different areas, and we can kind of go back to this, as well as we are going to go into opening it up for input and Q&A, but we also are going to have live, and you can actually do this now. For input, we actually have a survey for budget to actually have that electronic submission of concerns as well, beyond what we have here today that we're going to receive from comments, as well as the handouts that you guys give us as well. We also have on our website, it's a forms based on there that you can actually scan this code on your phone to fill it out, as well as it's going to be up on our website and LinkedIn as well. I'm not going to go to the next slide, which is just questions, because I will leave this up to allow people to scan and go to those survey questions if they so choose at this moment. Scott?
Okay, so let's get into some comments and potential priorities when it comes to this additional funds, one-time funds that have been made available. I'm thinking it would be most helpful to us to hear about initiatives that you find should have a priority. And so I'm actually going to switch back to the categories as kind of a thought-provoking, if any of these are of interest. But go ahead and start with comments. Mm-hmm. They will be this afternoon. And so it's a little before 1, so we'll take as many comments as we can before 1 o'clock, and then we'll need to shut off the mics, but we'll stick around and continue to take comments and questions. Go ahead. We'll stick around and take additional comments. Go ahead. Go ahead, sir.
Hi, mi nombre es Alfonso Méndez y vengo con CCI. La razón por el que estoy aquí es para pedir el dinero recibido por el plan de rescate americano, que se ha utilizado para crear un fondo para trabajadores que no fueron tomados en cuenta, que vienen siendo personas que no han recibido ninguna ayuda, personas indocumentadas y que son trabajadores esenciales por su trabajo y la economía sigue.
Hello, my name is Alfonso Mendez, and I am here with CCI. The reason I am here is to ask that the money received by the American Rescue Plan be used to create a fund for excluded workers who have not received any help, undocumented people, and those who are essential workers, that because of their work, the economy continues.
Yo fui una de las muchas personas que fueron contagiadas por el COVID, trabajando en la construcción. Sin embargo, no recibí ninguna ayuda por parte del empleador, y soy una de las personas que no recibieron dinero del estímulo, a pesar de que he contribuido a trabajar más de 21 años en la construcción y me ha afectado físicamente hasta el punto de que he quedado incapacitado y aún no he recibido ayuda.
I am one of the many people who were infected with COVID working in construction. However, I did not receive any help from my employer, nor did I receive stimulus checks, even though I have contributed to working more than 21 years in construction, and it has affected me physically to the point that I have become disabled, and I still have not received any help.
Estoy aquí como una persona representando a los trabajadores inmigrantes que no recibieron ninguna ayuda del gobierno por su estado migratorio, a pesar de que igual muchas personas que han sufrido durante la pandemia por perder su trabajo, enfermarse por COVID o sin poder pagar la renta.
I am here as a person representing all the immigrant workers who did not receive any help from the government because of their immigration status, even though we all suffered during the pandemic by losing our jobs, getting sick from COVID, or not being able to pay rent like everyone else.
La triste realidad es que en muchas partes del país no hay mucha ayuda para las familias inmigrantes. Se necesita un fondo para ayudar a los trabajadores excluidos aquí en el condado del Polk. Puede ser un comienzo para mejorar las vidas de las personas que trabajan y viven aquí. Por eso estoy presente con personas de CCI para un seguimiento del fondo para familias excluidas, que es algo digno, justo y posible. Nuestras familias han crecido aquí en Iowa. Amamos este país a pesar de nuestro estatus migratorio.
The sad reality is that in many parts of the country, there is not much help for immigrant families. A fund is needed to help excluded workers here in Des Moines. It can be a start to improving the lives of the people who work and live here. That is why I am here with people from CCI to ask for an excluded worker fund that could benefit many families. This is something dignified, fair, and possible. Our families have grown up here in Des Moines. We love it here despite of our immigration status.
Excuse me, my mic was off. Alfonso, I'm going to put you in contact with our services that can assist all families, even undocumented, through our impact service. So if you could stick around for just a minute, I want to put you in contact with somebody that can assist. Thank you.
Mi nombre es Blanca Sosa y resido en Des Moines. Vengo de parte de CCI para dejarles saber que la pandemia afectó mucho a nuestra comunidad hispana y las estadísticas lo muestran. Nosotros no pudimos trabajar de casa, tuvimos que salir, buscar trabajo para solventar los gastos atrasados.
Hello, my name is Blanca Sosa and I live in Des Moines. I am here with CCI to let you know that the pandemic affected the Hispanic community and the statistics shows it. We could not work from home. We had to leave, look for work to pay our bills.
Un fondo para trabajadores excluidos y esenciales en Des Moines ayudaría a muchas familias afectadas. Tenemos que ser solidarios y ayudarnos.
A fund for excluded and essential workers in Des Moines would help many affected families. We must show solidarity to help each other.
Yo fui parte de los trabajadores esenciales en Des Moines y es por eso por lo que yo hoy te pido por favor me consideres a mí y a las demás personas como yo en fondos de ayuda, porque quizás no lo veas ahorita, pero nos necesitamos mutuamente. I am one of the city's essential workers. That's why today I ask you to please consider me and other people like me in relief funds, because you may not see it now, but we need each other. Thank you. Y la gran pregunta sería, ¿ya tienes el fondo? ¿Nos pudieras considerar ahí? And the big question is, you have the money, or you will be receiving the money. Will you consider helping us?
Hola, mi nombre es Oralia Martínez, mi dirección es 25 County Line RD, lote 137, Des Moines, Iowa. Estoy aquí representando a mi comunidad hispana para pedirles que no nos ignoren en esta pandemia. Nosotros tenemos suficientes batallas, tanto como todos los demás. Exigimos que utilicen una parte de ese dinero que recibieron para parte del plan de rescate americano, crear un fondo para trabajadores incluidos.
Hello, my name is Oralia Martinez. My address is 2525 County Line Road, Lot 137, and I am here with the support of Iowa CCI. I am here representing my Hispanic community to ask you to not ignore us during the pandemic. We have suffered, struggled as much as everyone else. We ask that you use a portion of the money Des Moines received from the American Rescue Plan to create a fund for excluded workers.
Es algo justo y tenemos derecho a recibir ese apoyo, esa ayuda, aunque no tenemos documentos, también pagamos nuestros impuestos y contribuimos a la economía.
This is something just, and we deserve to receive help. Although many of us don't have legal documents, we pay our fair share in taxes and contribute to the economy.
La comunidad latina es ignorada exclusiva en muchos aspectos, como discriminación por nuestro estado migratorio, por no saber mucho inglés o por el color de nuestra piel. Merecemos mejor otra vida. Deberíamos de poner el ejemplo para otras ciudades de ser un lugar incluido de todas las familias, empezando con dar alivio a la pandemia, a los trabajadores exclusivos y esenciales. Gracias y esperamos una respuesta positiva. Gracias.
The Latinx community is often ignored or excluded in many ways. We are discriminated against because of our immigration status, because we don't know English very well, or because of the color of our skin. We deserve better. Des Moines should set an example to other cities by being inclusive of all families, starting with providing excluded and essential workers COVID relief. Thank you, and we hope to hear a positive response.
Thank you for translating. Lance?
Lance Henning with Greater Des Moines Habitat for Humanity, 2200 East Euclid.
Just have to be close.
All right. I would just like to, when we think about the housing side, thinking about home ownership for all our workforce, and a big piece of that, as you look at the increasing costs of what's been happening, just looking at the median sales price and the increase that we've seen this year, the aspect of the home builders have a statistic for the metro area that for every $1,000 in increase in housing costs, that 550 households are priced out. Based on the median house price change just this year, that's about 22,000 households across the metro. So it's pretty significant. And so a couple of ways, and the main way we could look at that is thinking about a significant down payment assistance program that could be a deferred lien that could help folks to be able to attain home ownership, and this could be for our workforce and all the people that are making a critical difference in our community. Another aspect to think about is on the homeowners that already exist, and thinking about energy efficiency and doing a homeowner-occupied energy efficiency program to help people be able to be successful in their homes. So, thank you.
Thank you, Lance.
Matthew Covington. I live at
28th and Cottage Grove. Thanks for leaving the microphone on, much appreciated.
Yes.
And appreciate this opportunity. I like that you all are actually thinking broad. My understanding of the ARP is that it gives some leeway to be creative, especially with a racial and equity justice lens. I like this broadness. I don't see much about direct relief to people or ways to combat the direct effects, health effects of the COVID-19 pandemic, including mental health. That's the one thing I see missing unless you threw that in under et cetera. So I'm encouraged but also disappointed that there isn't more focus on that. I support an excluded worker fund, and I encourage you all to look at ways to use ARP money with that equity lens. Like, so in the video presentation, there was talk about that equity toolkit. Glad that's happening. Is that available and promoted to all cultures and languages that are spoken in our communities? There was talk about the crisis advocacy response. I'm glad to see that is something so that we can better address people with mental health needs. What about the mental health needs of all of our immigrant populations? Are we looking into areas like that to at least to invest in them, to show them that we care, that there are options, and to build up their skills in the community once these one-time funds are gone? I just would encourage us to look at that way and make another category, please. Thank you.
Okay, again, I want to thank everyone for coming out and remind you that this information will be available along with the survey at the dsm.city website. And again, I will be sticking around for a little bit longer. We've heard what you've given us on suggestions and including more opportunities to speak more. So we look forward to putting those opportunities out in front of you. Thank you, everyone.